Thomas Mitchell stood perfectly still outside Buckingham Palace, his red uniform spotless, his tall black hat casting a shadow over his weathered face. For 15 years he had served as one of the Queen's Guard, and in all that time, he had never broken protocol, not once. The tourists gathered around him taking photos, making jokes, trying to make him smile or move, but Thomas remained like a statue, his eyes fixed straight ahead, his mind disciplined and focused. But today was different. Today, something inside his chest felt heavy, like a stone had settled there and refused to move. His wife Sarah had been in the hospital for 3 weeks now, fighting a battle against cancer that seemed to grow stronger each day while she grew weaker. The doctors had called him that morning with news that made his hands shake as he held the phone. The cancer had spread. They were talking about weeks now, not months. Thomas had wanted to stay home, to hold Sarah's hand and tell her everything would be all right. But Sarah had insisted he go to work. "The Queen needs her guard," she had said with that gentle smile that had won his heart 22 years ago. "And I need you to be the man I married, strong, dependable, honorable." So here he stood, fighting back tears that threatened to spill from eyes that had seen too much pain lately. A little girl with curly blonde hair broke away from her mother's hand and walked right up to Thomas. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, wearing a pink dress with a small tiara on her head. She looked up at him with wide, curious eyes and whispered, "Are you sad, Mr. Guard?" Her innocent question hit him like a physical blow, but Thomas kept his face perfectly still, even as his heart raced. The mother quickly grabbed the child's hand. "I'm so sorry," she said to Thomas. "Emma, you can't talk to the guard. He's working." But little Emma wasn't easily discouraged. She stayed there for a moment longer, studying Thomas's face with the keen observation that only children possess. Then she did something unexpected. She reached into her small purse and pulled out a drawing she had made. It was a picture of a guard in a red uniform, but this guard was smiling and there were flowers all around him. "This is for you," Emma whispered, placing the drawing carefully at Thomas's feet before her mother could stop her. "So you won't be sad anymore." The mother looked embarrassed and pulled Emma away, apologizing again. But Thomas stared down at that simple drawing, and something inside his chest loosened just a little bit. As the day wore on, Thomas found himself thinking about Emma's kindness. Here was a child who had seen past his uniform, past his training, past all the barriers he had built to do his job. She had seen his pain and responded with the only thing she had to give, a drawing made with love. It reminded him of Sarah when she was young, how she could always see through his tough exterior to the heart underneath. When his shift ended, Thomas carefully picked up the drawing and folded it gently into his pocket. He walked to the hospital, with quick steps, eager to see Sarah, to tell her about the little girl who had shown him such unexpected kindness. But when he arrived at Sarah's room, the nurse met him in the hallway with gentle eyes and words that changed everything. Sarah had passed away peacefully that afternoon. Just an hour after Thomas's shift had started, she had waited for him to leave for work, the nurse explained, because she didn't want him to have to choose between duty and love. She had left him a letter, written in her shaky handwriting, telling him how proud she was of the man he had become, how honored she felt to be married to someone who served something greater than himself. Thomas sat beside Sarah's empty bed and pulled out Emma's drawing. Through his tears he looked at the smiling guard surrounded by flowers, and he understood something he had never grasped before. Sarah had always seen him the way Emma had seen him today, not as a cold, unfeeling statue, but as a human being, with a heart capable of both great strength and great love. That night Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He would continue to serve as a royal guard, but he would find a way to honor both his duty and his humanity. He would find a way to be the guard in Emma's drawing, strong and dependable, but also capable of bringing flowers into the world, of spreading the kind of love that Sarah had given him, and that a little girl had shown him on the darkest day of his life. As he walked home through the quiet London streets, Thomas felt the weight of grief on his shoulders, but also something else. A small spark of hope that even in the deepest darkness, human kindness could shine through. Emma's drawing remained folded carefully in his pocket, a reminder that sometimes the most profound gifts come from the most unexpected sources, and that love has a way of finding us, even when we think we're too broken to receive it. The next morning would bring new challenges, new tourists, and the same rigid protocols he had followed for 15 years. But Thomas knew that something fundamental had shifted inside him. He was still a royal guard, still bound by duty and honor, but now he carried with him the memory of a little girl's compassion and his wife's final act of love, letting him go so he could continue to serve, but also so he could learn to live again. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's funeral, and Thomas returned to his post outside Buckingham Palace with a heart that felt both empty and strangely open. The other guards noticed the change in him. There was a softness around his eyes that hadn't been there before, though his posture remained as perfect and his discipline as unwavering as ever. He still stood motionless for hours, still ignored the attempts of tourists to break his concentration. But something deep inside had shifted. Emma's drawing remained in his wallet, carefully protected between 2 pieces of cardboard. During his breaks, he would take it out and study the smiling guard she had drawn, wondering how a 5-year-old had seen something in him that he hadn't even known existed. Sarah's letter was there too. Her words about pride and service and love written in the handwriting that had grown shakier as her illness progressed, but never less beautiful. On this particular morning, a group of school children arrived with their teacher, all of them excited to see the famous guards. Thomas watched from the corner of his eye as they lined up for photos, their faces bright with curiosity and wonder. One boy, maybe 8 years old, was in a wheelchair. His classmates were running around, but he sat quietly, watching Thomas, with the same intense attention that Emma had shown weeks before. The teacher was trying to organize the children for a group photo, when she noticed the boy in the wheelchair hanging back. "Come on, Marcus," she called gently. "Don't you want to be in the picture with the guard?" But Marcus shook his head, his eyes downcast. Thomas could see the child felt different from his classmates, left out of their excitement and energy. Without thinking, without breaking any rules but bending them in a way that felt right, Thomas did something he had never done before. He shifted his eyes, just slightly, to meet Marcus's gaze directly. It was a tiny movement, invisible to most observers, but Marcus saw it. The boy's face lit up with surprise and joy. For just a moment, Thomas allowed the tiniest hint of a smile to touch the corner of his mouth. Marcus straightened in his wheelchair and called to his teacher. "Miss Johnson." The guard looked at me. He really looked at me. The other children gathered around, suddenly interested in Marcus in a way they hadn't been before. They helped position his wheelchair right in front of Thomas for the photo, and Marcus beamed, with pride as if he had been chosen for something special. After the children left, Thomas found himself thinking about that moment of connection. He hadn't spoken or moved or broken protocol in any obvious way, but he had acknowledged a child who needed to feel seen. It was such a small thing, but it had meant everything to Marcus. Thomas began to understand that being a guard didn't mean being inhuman. It meant being human in service of something greater. Over the following days, Thomas began to notice things he had trained himself to ignore before. He saw the elderly woman who came every Tuesday to look at the palace, always alone, always carrying a photo of a young soldier. He noticed the man who brought his daughter with special needs every Saturday, pointing out the guards and explaining their history with infinite patience. He observed the young couple from another country who saved money for months to afford this trip, holding hands and whispering to each other in a language he didn't understand, but in tones of wonder he recognized perfectly. Thomas realized that his post wasn't just about protecting the palace. It was about being part of something that brought joy and wonder to people from all over the world. He was a symbol of stability, tradition, and honor, and people traveled thousands of miles just to see him stand there. That wasn't a burden. It was a privilege. One afternoon, a teenage girl approached with her grandmother, who was using a walker and moving very slowly. The grandmother explained in a whisper that she was 93 years old and had wanted to see the changing of the guard her entire life. "My husband served in the war," she said quietly. "He always talked about the guards at Buckingham Palace, how proud they made him to be British. He passed last year, and I promised him I'd come see for myself. The girl was worried about her grandmother standing for so long, but the elderly woman was determined to wait for the changing of the guard ceremony. Thomas watched as other tourists, seeing the situation, quietly made space for the grandmother, bringing her a folding chair someone had fetched from a nearby cafe. Strangers began talking to her, sharing their own stories about family members who had served in the military. When the changing of the guard began, Thomas participated in the ceremony with renewed purpose. He thought about the grandmother's husband, about all the soldiers who had served, about Sarah and her pride in his service, about Emma and her innocent kindness, about Marcus and his need to feel special. Every step of the ceremony felt meaningful in a way it hadn't before. After the ceremony, as Thomas was leaving his post, he walked past the grandmother. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes and mouthed the words, "Thank you." Thomas gave her the slightest nod, barely perceptible but unmistakably acknowledging her gratitude. The teenager helped her grandmother to her feet, and Thomas heard the old woman say, "Your grandfather would have been so proud to see this. These young men understand what service really means." That evening, Thomas sat in his empty house and realized something profound had happened to him. He was still grieving Sarah, still felt the loneliness that came with losing the person who had been his whole world for over 20 years. But he was also discovering that service could be a form of love, that duty could be a way of caring for others, and that even in silence and stillness he could touch lives and make people feel seen and valued. He pulled out Emma's drawing one more time, looking at the smiling guard surrounded by flowers. Thomas understood now that the flowers weren't decorations. They were symbols of all the beauty that bloomed when people connected with each other, even in the briefest moments, even without words. He was beginning to see that he could honor Sarah's memory not by hiding from the world behind his uniform, but by finding ways to spread the same love and kindness she had always shown to everyone she met. 2 months after Sarah's death, Thomas had developed a routine that helped him navigate his grief while finding new meaning in his role as a royal guard. He would arrive early each day, spending a few quiet minutes looking at the palace and thinking about all the history these walls had witnessed, all the people who had stood where he stood, all the lives that intersected here in this place of ceremony and tradition. On this particular morning, something unusual was happening. A news crew had set up nearby, and Thomas could see reporters preparing for what appeared to be a live broadcast. He overheard fragments of conversation about a special feature story, something about the human side of the royal guards. Thomas felt uncomfortable with the attention. He had always preferred the anonymity that came with the uniform, the way it allowed him to serve without his personal story becoming part of the narrative. As tourists began to gather, Thomas noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was Emma's mother, the woman whose daughter had left him the drawing that had changed his perspective on everything. She was alone this time, and Thomas could see she was looking around anxiously, checking her phone repeatedly. Something was wrong. During his break, Thomas did something he had never done before. He approached a fellow guard, James, who had been his partner for many ceremonies over the years. "I need to ask you something unusual," Thomas said quietly. "There's a woman here whose daughter showed me kindness when I needed it most. She seems distressed. Is there any way we can help?" James looked surprised. Thomas had always been the most by-the-book guard in their unit, never one to get personally involved with tourists or their problems. But James had also noticed the change in Thomas over the past few months, the way his rigid discipline had somehow become more compassionate without becoming less professional. "What do you have in mind?" James asked. Thomas explained about Emma in the drawing, about how the child's simple act of kindness had helped him through the darkest period of his life. He told James about Sarah, about the lessons he was learning, about service and humanity. James listened without interruption, and when Thomas finished, he nodded slowly. "Let's see what we can do," James said. During the next break, James casually walked near Emma's mother while Thomas maintained his post. James overheard her talking to someone on the phone, her voice filled with worry. "She's been missing since this morning," the woman was saying. "She said she was going to find the sad guard and give him another picture. I've looked everywhere." James returned to Thomas and quietly explained the situation. Emma had apparently run away from home, determined to find Thomas and give him another drawing. She had told her mother that the guard had looked sad the last time they visited, and she wanted to make sure he was okay. The mother had been searching all morning, starting with the palace since this was the last place they had seen Thomas together. Thomas felt his heart clench. A 5-year-old child was lost in London, and it was because she had been worried about him. The irony wasn't lost on him. Emma had shown him kindness when he needed it most, and now she was in danger because she was trying to show him kindness again. Without hesitation, Thomas made a decision that would normally be unthinkable. He spoke directly to Emma's mother, breaking protocol in a way that could cost him his position but felt absolutely necessary. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said quietly, during a moment when no tourists were paying close attention. "I'm the guard your daughter gave a drawing to several weeks ago. I understand she's missing and I want to help find her." The woman's eyes widened in surprise and relief. "You remember her?" "I remember her very clearly," Thomas said, his voice gentle but urgent. "She helped me through a very difficult time. Her drawing meant more to me than she could possibly know. Where have you already looked?" The mother explained that she had searched the park nearby, the tube stations, and had even called the police. Emma had left the house that morning with her art supplies, telling her mother she had an important mission to complete. Thomas thought about what he would do if he were a 5-year-old trying to find a specific guard at the palace. "Has she been here before besides that first time?" Thomas asked. "Yes," the mother replied. "We came back once more about 2 weeks ago. She wanted to see if you were still sad. She was disappointed because it was a different guard that day." Thomas nodded, understanding dawning on him. "If she's trying to find me specifically, she might be waiting somewhere she could watch for me. There's a small garden area across the street where children sometimes sit with their parents. It has a clear view of this post." James stepped forward. "I'll go check," he offered. "You need to stay here." But Thomas shook his head. He looked at Emma's mother, seeing the fear and desperation in her eyes, and made another unprecedented decision. "I'm going with him," he announced. "This child is in danger because of me, and I'm not going to stand here doing nothing while she's lost." Thomas did something he had never done in 15 years of service. He left his post without permission, during active duty. He and James crossed the street to the small garden area, with Thomas still in his full ceremonial uniform, his tall black hat making him visible from a distance. And there she was. Emma sat on a bench under a large tree, her small legs swinging as she worked intently on a drawing. When she looked up and saw Thomas approaching, her face broke into the biggest smile he had ever seen. "Mr. Sadguard," she called out, jumping down from the bench and running toward him. "I made you another picture. Are you still sad?" Thomas knelt down to Emma's level, his ceremonial uniform pooling around him on the ground. For the first time in his career, he didn't care about protocol or proper procedure or what anyone might think. All that mattered was this brave, kind little girl who had risked everything to try to help someone she barely knew. "I'm much less sad now," Thomas told her honestly. "But you scared your mother very much by leaving without telling her where you were going. She's been looking for you all morning." Emma's face fell. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Last time we came, you weren't here, and I was worried something bad had happened to you." Thomas felt tears sting his eyes. Here was a child who had shown more genuine care for his well-being than he had shown for his own in months. "You have a very kind heart, Emma," he said. "But next time you want to help someone, you need to tell your mother first, okay? She loves you very much, and she was very frightened." Emma nodded solemnly, then held out her new drawing. This one showed 2 figures, a guard and a little girl, and they were both smiling. Around them were not just flowers, but other people, all connected by lines that Emma had carefully drawn between them. "This is us being friends," Emma explained, "and these lines show how kindness spreads from one person to another person to another person. My mom taught me that." Thomas looked at the drawing, and everything suddenly made perfect sense. This was what Sarah had tried to tell him, what his service was really about. What Emma had understood instinctively with the wisdom that sometimes only children possess. They were all connected, all part of something larger, all responsible for spreading kindness and care to one another. The consequences of leaving his post came swiftly. Within hours of returning Emma safely to her mother, Thomas found himself sitting across from his commanding officer, Colonel Harrison, in an office that felt far more intimidating than any position he had ever held outside the palace. His 15 years of exemplary service felt fragile in the face of this one unprecedented breach of protocol. In all my years of service, Colonel Harrison began, his voice stern, but not unkind, I have never had a guard abandon his post during active duty. Never. Do you understand the seriousness of what you've done, Thomas? Thomas sat perfectly straight, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes focused ahead just as they had been during countless hours of duty. Yes, sir. I understand completely. A child was in danger because she was looking for me specifically, sir. I made a judgment call that her safety was more important than protocol. Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying Thomas carefully. Tell me about this child. So Thomas told him everything. He spoke about Sarah's death, about the drawing Emma had given him on the worst day of his life, about how a 5-year-old's simple act of kindness had helped him find meaning in his grief. He explained about the connections he had begun to notice, the elderly grandmother who had waited her whole life to see the changing of the guard, the boy in the wheelchair who just needed to feel seen, all the people who found something important in the ceremony and tradition that Thomas represented. She ran away from home because she was worried about me, Thomas concluded. A child I barely know put herself in danger because she cared about my well-being. How could I stand at my post knowing that? Colonel Harrison was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed. Thomas, you've been one of our most reliable guards for 15 years. Never late, never out of uniform, never a complaint. Your record is spotless. Yes, sir. Which makes this incident all the more unusual. The colonel stood up and walked to the window overlooking the palace grounds. Do you know why we have guards at Buckingham Palace, Thomas? To protect the royal family and maintain security, sir. That's part of it, Colonel Harrison agreed. But there's more to it than that. We're symbols, Thomas. We represent continuity, tradition, stability. People come from all over the world to see us because we represent something they need to believe in. That there are still people who dedicate their lives to service, to honor, to something greater than themselves. Thomas waited, unsure where this conversation was heading. What you did today, the colonel continued, leaving your post to help find a missing child. Some would say that was a dereliction of duty. Others might say it was exactly what a true guardian should do. The colonel turned back to face Thomas. I've received 3 phone calls this afternoon. One was from Emma's mother. She wanted me to know that in 30 years of living in London, she had never seen such kindness from someone in authority. She said you restored her faith in what service really means. Thomas felt surprise flicker across his face, but he remained silent. The second call was from a reporter who witnessed the whole incident. Apparently there's footage of you kneeling in your full ceremonial uniform, talking to a little girl. The reporter wanted to know if this was standard procedure for royal guards. Now Thomas felt genuine concern. Media attention was the last thing he wanted. The third call was from Buckingham Palace directly. Colonel Harrison paused for effect. They've seen the footage, they want to meet with you. Thomas felt his heart sink. This was it. The end of his career. Public embarrassment. Everything. Sarah had been proud of Destroyed because he had let his emotions override his training. But Colonel Harrison surprised him. Thomas, they don't want to discipline you. They want to commend you. What you did today embodied the very best of what the Royal Guard represents. You showed that strength and compassion aren't opposites. They're partners. You proved that true service sometimes requires making difficult choices about what matters most. Thomas struggled to process this information. Sir, I broke protocol. I abandoned my post. You did, the colonel agreed. And in doing so, you reminded everyone who witnessed it, including me, why we serve in the first place. It's not about following rules blindly. It's about protecting and caring for people, especially those who can't protect themselves. Colonel Harrison returned to his desk and picked up a folder. The palace has made a decision. They want you to be part of a new initiative they're launching. It's called the Community Guard Program. Selected guards will be trained to engage with visitors in appropriate ways, to be ambassadors of kindness and connection, while maintaining all the dignity and tradition of our service. Thomas stared at the colonel in disbelief. They want me to train other guards? They want you to help design the program. Your actions today have shown them something they hadn't fully realized, that our greatest strength as guards isn't our ability to remain motionless, but our ability to represent the very best of human character while we serve. Thomas thought about Emma's second drawing, the one showing how kindness spreads from person to person through invisible lines of connection. What exactly would this program involve? Teaching guards how to acknowledge visitors appropriately, how to be present with people without breaking protocol, how to be both professional and human. The palace realizes that people don't just come to see the building or even the royal family. They come to see what honor and service look like in human form. The colonel leaned forward. Thomas, you've discovered something in your grief that many people never learn in a lifetime. You've learned that serving others is how we honor the people we've loved and lost. Sarah would be proud of what you did today. Thomas felt tears threaten for the second time that day. But this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition. Everything that had happened since Sarah's death, every small connection he had made, every moment of seeing, passed his uniform to the people who needed to be seen. It was all leading to this. Would I still stand guard? Thomas asked. Of course, but you'd also help other guards understand what you've learned. That true strength comes from caring, not from indifference. That honor is about serving people, not just serving an institution. Thomas thought about Marcus in his wheelchair, about the grandmother who had waited 93 years to see the changing of the guard, about Emma and her wise, innocent heart. He thought about Sarah and her final words about being proud of the man he had become. I would be honored to accept this assignment, sir. Colonel Harrison smiled, the first time Thomas had ever seen his commanding officer's face soften. Good. Because that little girl who gave you a drawing has just changed the way the Royal Guard operates. Her kindness didn't just help you heal. It's going to help us all remember what service really means. As Thomas left the colonel's office, he realized that Emma had been right about the lines connecting people in her drawing. Her simple act of compassion had created ripples that reached all the way to Buckingham Palace itself, transforming not just his understanding of his role, but the very definition of what it means to be a royal guard. 6 months later, Thomas stood in the same spot outside Buckingham Palace, but everything had changed. The Community Guard program had been officially launched, and he now wore a small, discreet pin on his uniform, barely visible to casual observers, but meaningful to those who knew its significance. It marked him as one of the guards trained in what the palace had begun calling compassionate service. The morning was crisp and clear, perfect for the changing of the guard ceremony that would take place in an hour. But first, Thomas had something special to do. Today marked exactly 1 year since Sarah's death, and he had planned a small personal ceremony to honor her memory and the journey he had taken since losing her daughter. Emma and her mother had become regular visitors, coming by every few weeks to see Thomas and to meet the other guards who were part of the new program. Emma, now 6 and even more thoughtful than before, had continued creating drawings for Thomas, but she had also started making them for other guards, visitors, and anyone who seemed like they might need a reminder that they were seen and valued. Today, she had brought something different. Instead of a drawing, she carried a small bouquet of flowers that she and her mother had picked from their garden. "These are for your wife," Emma announced when she saw Thomas during his break. "My mom told me that people who die don't really go away if we remember them with love." Thomas knelt down to accept the flowers, no longer concerned about his uniform or protocol when it came to these meaningful moments. "Sarah would have loved these, Emma, and she would have loved you." "Can you tell me about her?" Emma asked, settling down on the steps nearby. This had become one of their traditions. Emma would ask questions and Thomas would share stories about Sarah, about love, about loss, and about finding meaning in difficult times. Sarah was a lot like you, Thomas began, sitting beside Emma, while maintaining his dignity and bearing. She saw the best in people even when they couldn't see it in themselves. She believed that everyone deserved to be treated with kindness, no matter who they were or where they came from. Emma nodded solemnly. Is that why you help people now? Because she taught you how? Thomas considered the question carefully. Over the past months, he had helped numerous visitors in small but meaningful ways. There was the elderly man who came every week to honor his late wife's memory by visiting the palace where they had first met during the war. Thomas had learned to give him a small nod of acknowledgement that let the man know his devotion was witnessed and respected. There was the young mother with special needs children who struggled to manage them during their visit. Thomas had worked with palace security to create a quiet time slot when these families could enjoy the ceremony, without the overwhelming crowds, making the experience accessible and joyful for children who needed extra support. There was the group of veterans who came monthly to pay their respects. Thomas had coordinated with other guards to ensure these men and women received the recognition they deserved, standing a little straighter during the ceremony, offering subtle salutes that honored their service. Sarah helped me understand that being strong doesn't mean being cold, Thomas explained to Emma. It means being brave enough to care about people even when caring makes you vulnerable. Emma picked one flower from the bouquet and handed it to Thomas. This one is for you because you learned how to care. As they sat together, Thomas noticed a commotion near the palace gates. A news crew was setting up, and he could see reporters preparing for what looked like a significant broadcast. He had learned to be wary of media attention since his story had become public, but something about this felt different. James approached during his patrol and quietly informed Thomas that this was the scheduled interview about the community guard program. 6 months after its launch, the program had received international attention as other countries inquired about implementing similar approaches to ceremonial duties. The BBC wanted to document how the program was working and what impact it was having on both guards and visitors. They specifically asked to interview you, James said, about how personal loss led to professional growth, about finding humanity within tradition. Thomas felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever his private journey became public knowledge. But then he looked at Emma, who was carefully arranging the remaining flowers in a small pattern on the steps, and he remembered something Sarah had written in her letter. Your story might help someone else find their way through darkness. Would you like to be part of this? Thomas asked Emma and her mother. You were a big part of starting this whole thing. Emma's eyes lit up. Can I show them my drawings? An hour later, Thomas found himself sitting in front of cameras, still, in his full ceremonial uniform but speaking openly about grief, loss, and the unexpected ways that healing can come through service to others. He talked about Sarah and her final act of love in encouraging him to continue serving. He spoke about Emma's drawings and how a child's compassion had opened his eyes to possibilities he had never imagined. The Community Guard program isn't about changing tradition, Thomas explained to the reporter. It's about understanding what tradition really means. For centuries, the Royal Guard has represented the best of human character, honor, dedication, selflessness. But we forgot that the best of human character also includes compassion, connection, and the courage to care about one another. Emma had been invited to show her drawings, and she proudly displayed the evolution of her artwork. The first drawing of the sad guard had been joined by dozens of others. Guards helping children, guards acknowledging elderly visitors, guards standing strong while also standing with their community. This is my favorite, Emma announced, holding up her most recent creation. It showed the palace surrounded by people of all ages and backgrounds, with guards not just protecting the building, but connecting all the people together through those invisible lines of kindness she had always drawn. The reporter asked Thomas what he hoped people would understand about the changes they were making. I hope they understand that strength and kindness aren't opposites, Thomas replied. The strongest thing I've ever done was allow myself to be vulnerable enough to receive help from a 5-year-old child. The most honorable thing I've done in 15 years of service was leave my post to help find a missing little girl who cared about my well-being. He paused, thinking about Sarah and the year of growth and discovery that had followed her death. Service isn't about standing apart from humanity. It's about standing with humanity, representing the very best of what we can be for each other. Every person who visits here is carrying their own story, their own struggles, their own need to believe that honor and kindness still exist in the world. Our job is to show them that it does. As the interview concluded, Thomas stood and resumed his position for the changing of the guard ceremony, but now, as the familiar ritual began, he carried with him the knowledge that every step, every movement, every moment of the ceremony was an act of love. Love for tradition, love for service, and love for all the people who needed to witness something beautiful and enduring in an often difficult world. Emma watched from the crowd, clutching her remaining flowers, her face glowing with pride as she saw how her simple act of kindness had grown into something that was touching lives around the world. The invisible lines of connection she had always drawn were becoming visible to everyone. 2 years had passed since that first drawing, and Thomas now stood in a place he had never imagined possible. He was addressing a room full of ceremonial guards from 12 different countries, all gathered at Buckingham Palace for the first International Conference on Compassionate Service. The Community Guard program had grown beyond anyone's expectations, inspiring similar initiatives across the world. Thomas looked out at the faces before him. Guards from Canada, Australia, Sweden, Japan, and many other nations where ceremonial duties were part of cultural tradition. Some looked skeptical, others curious. All of them dedicated professionals trying to understand how to balance rigid protocol with human connection. When I first became a Royal Guard, Thomas began, I believed that excellence meant becoming invisible as a person while being completely visible as a symbol. I thought the uniform made me stronger by making me less human. I was wrong about that, and it took the wisdom of a 5-year-old child to help me understand why. He clicked to the first slide of his presentation, showing Emma's original drawing of the sad guard. A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the audience as they saw the simple but powerful image. This drawing was given to me on the day my wife died. Thomas continued, his voice steady but warm. I had stood at my post for hours, following every protocol perfectly, while inside I was falling apart. This little girl saw through all my training, all my discipline, all my barriers, and she saw a human being who needed kindness. Thomas told them about the journey that had followed. The difficult weeks of grief, the gradual awakening to the connections happening around him every day, the decision to leave his post to help find Emma when she went missing, and the unexpected support from his commanding officers and the palace itself. The Community Guard program isn't about abandoning discipline or tradition, Thomas explained. It's about understanding that the highest form of discipline is having the strength to care about others, and the deepest tradition is the human tradition of looking out for one another. A guard from the Canadian Ceremonial Guard raised his hand. But how do you maintain the dignity and formality that people expect while also being, as you put it, human? Thomas smiled. This was always the first question, and it was the most important one. Let me show you, Thomas said, and he moved to the center of the room. He stood at perfect attention, every line of his posture embodying the precision and dignity expected of a ceremonial guard. He remained motionless for a full minute, demonstrating the impressive discipline that was the hallmark of his service. Then, without changing his posture or breaking his stance, Thomas shifted his eyes to make direct contact with the questioner. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Suddenly the guard wasn't a statue, but a person acknowledging another person. That's the difference, Thomas explained. Every guard in this room can stand perfectly still for hours, but can you stand still while still being present with the people around you? Can you maintain your dignity while acknowledging theirs? Can you be both a symbol and a human being? Over the next hour, Thomas walked the international guards through the techniques they had developed. How to make eye contact appropriately without breaking concentration. How to position yourself to acknowledge visitors with special needs. How to handle moments when compassion required bending protocol without breaking it entirely. But more than techniques, he shared the philosophy that had transformed his understanding of service. We are not just protecting buildings or ceremonies, Thomas told them. We are protecting people's faith in goodness, their belief that honor and dedication still exist, their need to witness something stable and beautiful in an uncertain world. When a child sees us and feels safer, when an elderly person sees us and remembers their own service or sacrifice, when a family travels thousands of miles to witness what we represent, we are serving something much larger than any individual institution. After the formal presentation, Thomas was approached by a young guard from the Swedish Royal Guard. "I have a question that might sound silly," the woman said hesitantly. "No question about service is silly," Thomas assured her. "I've been a guard for 3 years and I love the honor of it, the tradition, the discipline. But sometimes I feel lonely, like I'm disappearing behind the uniform. How do you stay yourself while serving something bigger than yourself?" Thomas understood exactly what she meant. "You don't disappear behind the uniform," he told her. "You bring your full self to the uniform. Your compassion, your strength, your dedication. All of that makes the uniform more meaningful, not less." He paused, thinking about how to explain something that had taken him years to understand. The uniform doesn't make you less human. It gives you a way to express the best of your humanity in service to others. When I stand guard now, I'm not Thomas pretending to be a symbol. I'm Thomas using everything I am, including my capacity, to care, to be the best symbol I can be. That evening, there was a special ceremony in the palace courtyard. Emma, now 7 years old, had been invited to present a gift to the international delegates. She had spent weeks working on individual drawings for each guard, personalized with symbols from their countries and messages of connection and friendship. As Emma handed out her drawings, Thomas watched the faces of these serious, disciplined professionals soften with surprise and delight. Here was a child who understood intuitively what they were all still learning: that strength and kindness were not opposites but partners, that the highest form of service was service rendered with love. The Swedish guard who had spoken to Thomas earlier approached Emma with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for this beautiful picture," she said. "How did you know I needed to see this today?" Emma looked up at her with that same wise expression she had worn when she first approached Thomas 2 years ago. "Because everyone needs to know they matter," Emma said simply. "That's what the guards teach us, that everyone matters enough to protect and care for." Later that night, as Thomas walked home through the London streets, he carried with him the knowledge that Emma's simple act of kindness had now touched lives on 5 continents. Guards in countries he had never visited were learning to serve with both strength and compassion, because a little girl had been brave enough to approach a sad man and offer him a drawing. He stopped at Sarah's favorite bench in the small park, near their home, a bench where they had sat together countless evenings planning their future, sharing their dreams, supporting each other through life's challenges. Thomas pulled out his phone and looked at the photos from the day's ceremony, at Emma surrounded by guards from around the world, all of them smiling, all of them connected by invisible lines of understanding and care. "You were right, love," Thomas said quietly to the evening air, knowing somehow that Sarah could hear him. "Service is about love, and love has a way of spreading from one heart to another, across oceans and continents and all the barriers we think separate us from each other." Thomas reached into his wallet and pulled out Emma's first drawing, now carefully laminated and carried with him every day. The smiling guard surrounded by flowers had become a symbol not just of his own healing, but of a new understanding of what it meant to serve others with both strength and heart. As he walked the final blocks to his home, Thomas reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. Sarah's death had felt like an ending, but Emma's kindness had shown him it was actually a beginning. He had learned that grief could become grace, that loss could lead to love, that the deepest honor came not from standing apart from humanity, but from standing with it, serving it, and celebrating the invisible threads that connect every heart to every other heart. Tomorrow, he would return to his post outside Buckingham Palace. He would stand guard with the same discipline and dignity he had always maintained. But he would also carry with him the knowledge that he was part of something beautiful and eternal, the endless human story of people caring for one another, one act of kindness at a time, one drawing at a time, one heart at a time.